The dust devils spun across the barren landscape outside Fallujah, tiny whirlwinds of sand and debris that danced under a sky the color of bleached bone. For the men of SEAL Team 7, Charlie Platoon, this was home. A shattered city on the edge of the Euphrates River, a place where the walls were scribbled with extremist graffiti and the air hummed with the threat of IEDs. Among them, Chief Petty Officer Marcus Raines moved like a ghost. He was their designated sniper, a man of few words and unsettling patience, known for his ability to sit motionless for hours in an overwatch position, his eye pressed to the scope, a silent guardian over his brothers. He was the quiet professional, the one the younger guys looked to when the lieutenant's plans seemed too risky. But the mission in the spring of 2007 felt different, and the rules of engagement, or ROEs, had become a strangling noose. Marcus had read the memos, sat through the briefings. He understood the strategic importance of winning hearts and minds. But the tactical reality on the ground was a different beast entirely. They were fighting an enemy that wore no uniform, that melted into the population, that used women and children as cover. Time and again, Marcus had watched through his scope as a known insurgent moved through a crowd, his hand resting on the trigger, his finger itching, only to have to lower his rifle because the man hadn't made a overt hostile act. The enemy knew the ROAs better than the Americans did. They exploited them with chilling precision. The breaking point came on a sweltering Tuesday afternoon. That the platoon had set up a security cordon in a dense residential neighborhood after intel suggested a high-value target was meeting in a safe house. Marcus was perched in a second-story room, the window just a dark slit, his .300 Winchester Magnum cutting the room in half. He was watching the designated house, his breathing slow and rhythmic. Then he saw movement on a rooftop across the way. He adjusted his scope. A man, clearly an insurgent fighter by his dress and the AK-47 slung across his back, was setting up a position. He was alone, exposed, and he was setting up to ambush the squad Marcus's buddies were leading down the main street. This was it, a legitimate target. A combatant in the open. Marcus keyed his mic, his voice a low whisper. Actual Ghost. I have a fighter rooftop. Grid reference follows. He is setting up an ambush position on your route, requesting permission to engage. The radio crackled. Ghost Actual. Stand by. The seconds stretched into an eternity. Marcus watched the insurgent settle in behind a low wall, his rifle barrel aimed directly at the alley where Lieutenant Morrison and his men would pass. He could see the squad's point man, a kid from Ohio named Reynolds, just entering the alley's mouth. Actual to Ghost. Negative on the engage. Repeat, negative engage. We have eyes on a madrasa 2 blocks east. The ROE states no kinetic operations within 500 meters of a religious school. Hold your fire and track him. Marcus felt the blood drain from his face. The school was nearly a kilometer away. The ROE, designed to protect civilians, was now a death sentence for his brothers. But he watched the insurgent's shadow move, saw him check his watch. They were waiting for the squad to be in the kill zone. Actual, with respect, the ROE is being interpreted too broadly. He is an active combatant. He will fire on Reynolds in less than 60 seconds. The reply was immediate and sharp. Hold your fire, Ghost. That's a direct order. We are not jeopardizing the mission for one target. Track him. We'll adjust the squad's route. Adjust the route. It was too late. Reynolds was already in the alley. To turn back now would be a tactical nightmare, exposing their backs to the rooftops. Marcus watched the insurgent shoulder his weapon. It was a moment of crystalline clarity. The order was wrong. It was a betrayal of the men on the ground, and a decision made by a commander in an air-conditioned trailer who was more afraid of a JAG investigation than a silver body bag. In that split second, Marcus Raines made a choice. He stopped being a cog in a machine and became a man. He exhaled, held it, and gently squeezed the trigger. The crack of the rifle was deafening in the small room. Across the way, the insurgent's body jerked violently and crumpled behind the wall, his rifle clattering onto the roof. The ambush was over before it began. The silence that followed was heavier than the gunshot. Marcus's spotter, a young petty officer named Jensen, stared at him, his mouth agape. "Chief," he said, "hold fire." Marcus didn't look at him. He was already packing his rifle, his movements calm, deliberate. "I know what he said." Lieutenant Morrison's voice screamed over the radio. Who fired? Ghost, was that you? Report. What is your status?" Marcus keyed the mic one last time. "Target eliminated, threat neutralized. Squad is clear to proceed." He then switched frequencies, cutting himself off from the platoon net. The mission went on. The squad took fire from other positions, but they weren't ambushed. They made it to the safe house and secured the target. But for Marcus, the war was over. When they returned to the forward operating base, he was immediately pulled aside by the command master chief. He was stripped of his weapon and confined to a holding area. The other SEALs looked at him with a mixture of awe and fear. Some patted him on the back, whispering, "Good kill." Others, the careerists, avoided him like he had the plague. He had disobeyed a direct order. He had broken the sacred code. And the Navy's legal machine ground into action. They painted him as a rogue operator, a cowboy who put his own judgment above the mission. They argued that his single shot had endangered the entire strategic framework of the region. The lieutenant who gave the order, a man who had never been in a real firefight, testified that Marcus's actions were insubordinate and reckless. The prosecution was relentless, and for a while, it looked like Marcus Raines would spend the rest of his life in Leavenworth. But then the tide began to turn. Jensen, his young spotter, was called to testify. He was quiet, nervous, but his voice was steady. "The chief saved their lives," he said, looking directly at the panel of officers. "I saw the target. He was locked on Reynolds. The lieutenant's order would have gotten our guys killed. The chief knew it." Yeah, we all knew it. Other members of the squad corroborated his story. Reynolds, the point man, broke down on the stand, describing how close he had come to walking into the line of fire. The narrative shifted. The rogue SEAL was becoming a hero. The courtroom buzzed with tension on the final day. The prosecution, sensing their case crumbling, had offered Marcus a deal. Plead guilty to insubordination, accept a dishonorable discharge, and walk away a free man. His lawyer, a tired JAG officer who had grown to respect Marcus immensely, advised him to take it. "You saved your team, Marcus. The Navy will never admit that. Take the deal. Go home to your family." Marcus looked at the panel of officers, his accusers. They represented a system that had prioritized political correctness over the lives of its warriors. And he thought of the mountains of paperwork, the endless briefings on escalation of force, the fear in the lieutenant's voice on the radio. He thought of Reynolds, alive because of one bullet. He stood up, his frame still carrying the lean, coiled strength of a sniper. "Your Honor," he said, his voice carrying through the silent room, "I will not plead guilty to saving the lives of my brothers. The order I was given would have resulted in the death of an American sailor. I prevented that. If that is a crime, then this uniform means nothing." He looked at the lieutenant, who wouldn't meet his gaze. "I'll take my chances with the panel." The verdict came back after just 2 hours of deliberation. On the charge of disobeying a direct order in a combat zone, the panel found Chief Petty Officer Marcus Raines not guilty. The courtroom erupted. The SEALs in the audience, those who had fought alongside him, cheered. The officers on the panel sat in stony silence. The system had convicted one of its own and been found wanting. In the days that followed, the Navy offered him a new assignment, a quiet training role far from the battlefield. They wanted to bury the story, to forget that Marcus Raines had ever happened. But Marcus knew he couldn't stay. The trust was broken. He couldn't lead men into combat knowing that the orders he might have to relay could be as deadly as the enemy's bullets. He left the teams on his own terms, accepting an honorable discharge with his rank intact. There was no parade, no medal. Just a handshake from a few good men and a duffel bag full of memories. He drove away from the gates of Coronado, at the Pacific Ocean glinting in his rearview mirror, a ghost no longer bound by any chain of command, but his own conscience. The story of why he left was whispered in the training classes for years, a cautionary tale for the officers and a legend for the enlisted men. The sniper who broke orders to save his squad and walked away from the only life he'd ever loved because of it.